Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 30 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. This week's topic, why all music critics are wrong. It's Music is Everything, number 36. That's my opinion series, and you can see by the title it is highly opinionated. And we will get there, but first of all, as always, thank you for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast, and don't forget to subscribe there and click the bell that you'll get the notification when I upload videos, blah, blah, blah. I've been uploading a lot of shorts lately as well, which has been fun. And thank you for watching that. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre, and there's a link there to listen. Only listen wherever you listen, or the main places where you listen. And everyone, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band Rec, and everything I do. And of course, wherever you're listening or whatever you're doing, like, subscribe, share, rate, review, lather, rinse, repeat, and all that stuff. It helps. I have that song coaching business I've been talking about. A lot of changes are coming. If you want to lock in current pricing, go to nickdimatteo.com/song coaching, and you will get the information you need to see if it's right for you. If you've had that song inside of you for years and you just don't know what to do with it, I do know what to do with it, and I can get it out into the world for you. Also, Rec's new album, a couple weeks ago, June 20th, dropped. Kite to Camden, which has been on Bandcamp, is now worldwide streaming. Rec's new album, my God, I am so excited that it is being shared with the world. Please go check it out. Go to nickdimatteo.com/discography, and right there at the top, you'll see Kite to Camden. All right. So, topic again is why all music critics are wrong. As I said, this is a Music is Everything, my sub-series wherein I get highly opinionated. And this is number 36. So I've been doing this for quite a while, since the beginning, really. Just about the beginning. So why this topic? Okay, music writers, they're totally fine, except critics, they can be annoying, except they provide a service, except they're biased and gatekeepers, except they're humans doing a job, hopefully out of love of music. They're not perfect, except they often don't even seem to love or even understand music. So I have a real love-hate relationship with music writing. And you'll hear that. And this episode is my way of examining that and hopefully giving you some tools to do the same. Speaking of tools, the bonus MxTRA is me helping you figure out how best to use music writing, music critics, music reviews, etc. And I'll talk a little bit more of that, but that's at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Are critics always wrong? No, they often have insight. They often provide lots of info that you wouldn't otherwise get or that would be harder to get. But also, yes, they are always wrong because they are always wrong some of the time. And I also contend that the overall purpose and existence of music critics is off and wrong and in need of a massive overhaul, and I will explain that later. I'll also go through a prehistory, a history, the types of music writing. I'll spend a lot of this episode explaining why I take such issue with music criticism on the whole. I'll give you some conclusions. Then, of course, the featured song and questions. And that bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre that I just mentioned. Tips for how best to find the music criticism and writing that you like and how to get something good out of it. Sources, Wikipedia, The Siren article by Tyson Florence, Reddit, Quora, musicreviewworld.com, and dirt.fyi. Steve Erickson also mentioned a book that I did not read. Carl Wilson, not the Beach Boys guy, wrote a book on Celine Dion. And that was for last week's episode. Never mind. Chalk that up to me doing 2 episodes in one day. Disclaimers, I am biased. I always say that, and it's true. I already did an episode on Music Magazine, so I'll try to keep the overlap to only the essentials. There will be some overlap. I will not name names, most names, because I don't want to single out any specific writer. Finally, you can kind of consider this a companion, like I mentioned, to last week's episode on rockism versus poptimism, and that both deal with bias and the drawing of class lines, highbrow, lowbrow, etc. But let's get right into it. So, prehistory of the topic. music writing is at least as old as the late 1400s. By that I mean books, people writing books about music, not writing music. As for music journalism, that arose when journals or periodicals or magazines came to the fore. First magazines were in the 1600s, but they really started to come to the fore, I'd say 19th century, really. Refer to my episode again on music magazines for more info and a fuller history of music magazines. The writing, of course, at the time was exclusively on classical music, which was contemporary music, but there were many other forms of music that were not considered, worthy of being written about. And that classical music was orchestral music, chamber music, operas, soloists, etc., and consisted of musical analysis, discussion, interpretation, and evaluation, both of written music and performed music. Of course, for the majority of that period, there was no recorded music. It's notable that the majority of these writers prior to the 1840s were actual musicians and or composers who knew music theory and the art and act of music creation from the inside. I will come back to this point later and probably often. And while it's no surprise that likely all of the music writers of the period were men, it's troubling that the vast majority of music writers in history, including today, are also men. Around the 1840s is when the tide turned, and that was due to increased opportunity for people to be well educated about music, a general increased interest in music of all kinds, and the people who made and performed music. There were superstars, Franz Liszt, and etc. And after this point, the majority of music writers were not practicing musicians or composers. It's likely that at least for a while they were educated enough in music to know more than the average person. In fact, I think this would remain true for the most part regarding classical music writing straight up until today. Other music writing, not so much. Music magazines and writing exploded in the second half of the 19th century. Again, my magazine episode talks about that. As that century was ending, it was more common for writers to focus on a wider range of music, not just classical and orchestral and all of that stuff. And a perfect example is a publication I mentioned in that episode, which I think bears repeating here, the Etude, which was published from 1883 to 1957, straddling a hell of a lot of change. It made a point. It started out as, I think, for music teachers, and then branched way out and even included social issues, like someone you know does. Made a point of writing about current developments in music throughout its existence. So not just the tried and true and established. And that, of course, included many kinds of popular music throughout the years, up through jazz and TV and movie music and things, again, through 1957. Other publications arose which focused on non-classical or orchestral music, and so music journalism spread. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it became less necessary for writers to know the theory behind what they were writing about, especially after the advent of affordable recorded music, when the main focus shifted from live or written music, which were the only two things back then, to recorded or broadcast music, because publishers saw that they'd get more business by publishing pieces on popular music to help listeners and buyers decide what to spend money on or to read something about their favorite artist. So a critic's focus became more about judging the music than analyzing it. But while music journalism was more or less keeping up with changes, music criticism stuck with the more quote-unquote learned or highbrow forms of music, predominantly classical, right up until the middle of the last century. And classical writing was still a very relatively big thing, I think at least through the 1980s, and has diminished enough to the point now where it's very niche. This was largely due to a bias among critics that to be taken seriously, they needed to write about serious music. Keep this bias in mind as we move forward into the modern era and beyond. And guess what? We're moving forward into the modern era. It's been said that the Beatles changed a lot. They're a watershed for so much in music and culture. One of those changes is said to have been that music critics finally felt they could start to treat pop and rock music writing seriously, or what then was just considered pop. Anything that wasn't classical or jazz, or I guess folk, I don't know. Hard telling if this was due to market forces, more people buying this stuff and wanting it, or growing curiosity within the established writing community. Hey, what if I write about this instead of that? And or an influx of new writers who saw there was a lack of pop rock coverage and they felt a need to change that. They wanted to put their voice in. I think it's all those things, but mostly the last one. Whatever the reasons, this was really the second or third sea change in music writing. If you count and I'm talking about journal type writing, not books. If you count the 1840s as one sea change, where it went from mostly musicians and composers to mostly non-musicians and non-composers, and then say the early 20th century and advent of recorded music and how it shifted, away from classical and towards more popular forms. The next big shift was the early 60s and mid 60s, and when our, writers and publications said, we can write about this too, that's just as seriously. What came after that has shaped music writing ever since, and music publications, even online publications, both in order to establish themselves as legit and equally worthy of respect, and because that's the way these things seem to trend, which I will flesh out later. These new critics had to draw new lines as to what was worthy of critical review. I said almost the same thing last week, and it is true. And last week for me was an hour ago. But a week for you. Though all non-classical or jazz music was considered pop or popular, rock had started to separate itself enough by the mid-60s in both style and perceived substance and seriousness to warrant deeper consideration. So the first popular genre to achieve the elevated status of worthy of critical review was rock. Again, check out my episode last week for how this is also the origin of rockism. Most, if not all, of this new music writing from 64, let's say, happened in the UK. UK was ahead of the US by a couple of years in accepting pop or rock as worthy forms of music. NME, the New Musical Express, was one of the first to cover pop music as early as 1952. Melody Maker didn't really catch up, and then eventually would surpass NME by 1964, that watershed moment. Whereas the first American music critic to take rock music seriously is known to be, possibly, Richard Goldstein in 1966. The same year that the first major U.S. rock music publication started, Crawdaddy and Circus. Following year in 67 was Rolling Stone's debut, and it seems that every publication since has modeled itself on Rolling Stone to one degree or another, no matter what kind of music it's about. Eventually, other forms of pop music were given as much consideration as rock, until we end up with the general shape and mix of music writing that we still have today, which is you can write a piece on any kind of music at any time, and take it as seriously as anything else. The only other significant sea change in music, the history of the modern era of music writing, was in the 2000s, when both professionals and, much more importantly, non-professionals began sharing their music writing online in droves. And no need to go over the eventual decline of print media. We're living in that, accompanied by the decline of writing positions and the decline of pay for the remaining writers and musicians and actors and artists of all kind. But it's worth mentioning that. So that online sea change, while giving voice to anyone who wanted to weigh in on music, which is wonderful, also ushered in a steep decline in the vetting process and the overall quality of writing. Not only did you not need to be a musician or understand music, you could be tunnel vision and still put your thoughts out there, which eventually called upon actual writers to assert their dominance over the hobbyists and amateurs, which they did not by rivaling the quality of lauded music writers of lore. Some did. Some tried to up their game and up their quality, but in general, they just got far more high and mighty and far more sensational. I'll go over this in the conclusions, the many ways the critics have felt the need to try to prove that they are still relevant and that they know more than you do or that the next writer does. Okay, while bias, elitism, and bad writing have existed since forever, we know that. It seems that in the last 20 or 30 years, those things have become badges of honor. Or at least the first two, bias and elitism, are quite often badges of honor for writers. which brings about the third one, which is bad writing. Either as a way to get more attention, and I mean money. That's one of the things that's tough. Is it's so hard to get attention. I had to call this episode "Why All Music Critics Are Wrong." I wanted to call it that because I felt, oh, that's going to get more attention than here's a nuanced discussion of music writing, right? So I get that, even though it sucks. And yes, perceived respect they were going for, or it's also because the bar has been so lowered by the flood of casual music writers that you don't need to be as good anymore unless you work for, some of the big publications. And even some of those critics are some of the worst perpetrators of this stuff. That's been greatly sped up, this process, by podcasts, hello, and especially vodcasts, double hello, featuring people talking about music who act like experts, but who mostly are not. They are, like so many of the writers, editorialists and fans with varying degrees of experience in music, but mostly little to none. Other than being a rabid or voracious fan, cool. If you are positioning yourself as a music commentator and you're more of a music commentator of, I'm thinking like Entertainment Tonight or TMZ or one of those kind of like, it's more entertainment, gossipy kind of, this is my take on things. Please just state that. Don't say that you're an expert. I think you deserve to exist, and I think you're probably doing wonderfully well and probably have more fans than I do, and more power to you. But I wouldn't necessarily trust the judgments and recommendations of people who don't have enough of an extensive background in either music itself or voracious music listening or whatever. But the one upside to most of these mostly dudes and mostly white dudes is that they are usually pretty upfront about their biases, unlike most writers who very rarely cop to their biases. But not all writers are created equal. There have always been writers all along the spectrum, from total shit to brilliant, purely subjective to relatively objective, to full of vitriol and hatred, to full of respect and love. Yet no matter where a piece or a writer is on that spectrum, there's an almost 100% chance that there's something very wrong about it. If not because of it itself, then at least because of the system it stems from and what writing is forced to do. And I will get to that in my conclusions. And I'm not at the conclusions yet. It's going to be a slightly shorter episode than most, which is fine. You all deserve a break, right? And so do I. But before I get to the conclusions, I'm going to make some key distinctions of the kinds of writing I'm talking about, because there are many kinds of music writing, many types of music writing. Music writing is a general term. It encompasses music critics, but they aren't the only type of music writer. So here's a short explanation of these types, and I am, for the most part, separating out people who write books on music. This is about music journalism, because writers of books on music can in some ways actually be classified into these four categories anyway, and so the distinction is irrelevant. But more to the point, I'm talking about short-form writing that we absorb more readily, like you would think from someone like a music critic or etc. So, talking about the four types of writers, there is music journalism or music journalist, which is a reportage of facts and events, new technology, a new band, a new movement or genre popping up, any developments in the current state of music, or maybe reporting and commenting on someone who just died or something like that in a dispassionate manner, one that attempts to divorce itself from bias and opinion, much like the difference between a well-written article and an op-ed. So this music journalism is like an article as opposed to an opinion piece. The attempt is to be objective. Of course, 100% objectivity is not achievable, but the best journalists come close. The second kind of music writer is a music analyst, someone who does a music critique. Like the first music journal writing ever. These are people who know enough about music from the inside to break down a composition and really analyze it, or a recording. They do leave space for discussion, maybe speculating about the creator's intentions or why they made certain choices. They may leave space for interpretation, what they feel in their educated opinion, the music and the lyrics and the production, the performance signify. And they leave room for evaluation, whether or not it worked as a whole or in parts. This part of this composition worked, the whole thing, whatever. But it's usually interpretation is a smaller part of the writing than would be in a music criticism or for music critics. So if you say music journalism's objective is to be 100% objective. Boy, I say objective two different ways there. Fun. This kind of writer does a music critique or analysis is, let's say, meant to be 80% objective and 20% subjective. Fair enough. And a side note that I have made in other episodes, a distinction between criticism and critique. So I use the word critique to distinguish it from criticism, which we'll get to shortly. But first, a third type of writer is a music reviewer. So if the music journalist was 100% objective or close to it, music critique and analysis is 80-20. Music review is about 50-50 split. It offers up a thorough and hopefully accurate description of the subject, whether it's an album or a single or a concert, and does enough of that to help you understand what's being talked about, gives you the picture, often, but not always, with some context, like, let's say, things the artists themselves said, why they made what they did, or what this came after. Oh, this album followed this album, or what have you, or this single followed this single. So sometimes that context is also provided, depending on how long the piece is. And then the writer offers their opinion. Usually the opinion is stated fairly colloquially, casually, without artifice, what they liked, what they didn't like, where their own judgments come into play. I think in a lot of ways I fall more into this category because when I talk about, like when I do a chronology of an artist, I'll say this is one of my favorite albums, but it's my favorite. Other critics might disagree, or critics might disagree, or other fans might disagree. And of those songs, here are the ones I like on the album. I'm very clear that those are personal judgments, right? What might work even if they didn't like it, which is a good writer to be able to say, oh, this song really worked. It wasn't my fave, but it really worked. It contains a fair amount of opinion, but it's even-handed and owns up to its bias, is 50-50. And which brings me to the last type of writer, which is music critic, music criticism. This to me, and argue with me if you must, I think is 20% objective, fact, and 80% opinion. It is an op-ed. Music criticism is an op-ed, period. The writer gives you enough info about the subject to truly clue you in and get you mentally on board. Got to give you that. And then lays into it with tons of opinionated judgment and interpretation. Whether you agree or disagree with this kind of writing, it will evoke violently strong feelings. Meaning this, I think if you're going down the line, the dispassionate music journalist is probably the least emotional response and has the least emotion in it. If you're talking about a music analysis, somewhat more of an emotional response when you're going to interpretation and evaluation, right? When you're talking about a music reviewer, fair amount of emotion in there, but removed enough to understand that the emotion is not a final judgment. Let's say music critic, mostly emotion, no matter how they try to cloud it in intellect. Okay, so for example, it's like you've chosen a side in a war and are either rah-rah for the opinion and fuck those who aren't. That's a strong emotion. Or you absolutely hate the piece and hate the writer and want to kill both of them. So, example, a critic tears apart an album. If it's an album or artist you already can't stand, you feel bloodlust for the artist. Yeah, way to get them. Way to tear them down. If it's an album or artist you like, you feel bloodlust for the writer. Or that writer heaps praise on an album, your responses will be the opposite. So the writer heaps praise and you can't stand the artist or album. You'd be like, what a panderer. The writer heaps praise and you love and it gets you angry. The writer heaps praise and you love the album. You're like, yeah, finally somebody said what I'm thinking. But either way, it's very strong and to me, violent emotion. You're being prompted to feel more than think, which is an interesting thing to say about the music criticism, because it's often written as if you're meant to think more. And this is one of the issues I take with it. Almost all cases of this, the writer is not only not dispassionate, they're not casual or relatable. Lots of high-handedness, lots of snark. Pitchfork, anyone? Lots of proving to you why they're right. Little to no ownership of bias. Not for all of them, of course. These are general statements. It's the archly clever, flowery, quote-unquote learned prose of music analysis combined with the unfiltered opinion of a music review with not enough self-awareness. By the way, in the bonus MxTRA, I tell you which of these kinds of writing is my favorite, whether it's the music journalist, music analyst, music reviewer, or music critic, and go over what benefits you can get from it, as well as from any music writing and really any arts writing on a subject that interests you. Bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. And that's going to be where we take a break. When we come back from this break, conclusions and all the rest. Oh boy, it's going to get hot. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec or any other projects or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre if you'd really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. All right, we are back, and as promised, the all exciting and crazy conclusions. For these opinion pieces, this music is everything. The conclusions tend to be pretty beefy. So, why do I say all critics are wrong? The first important thing there is that I didn't say all music writers are wrong, right? Music journalists may make mistakes, but for the most part, they accurately report stuff. Those mistakes might be corrected in a future publication. Music analysts may include opinion, and they do, but it's a highly educated and informed opinion, and they educate you so much that you're more equipped to agree or disagree. Plus, they're usually careful to make a distinction between the analysis portion and the evaluation portion. Very careful. Music reviewers are mostly informing you about something new and then giving you their take on it in a way that leaves the conversation open enough for you to make your own decisions. That is, they own up to having an opinion, whether or not they explain where it comes from, depending on, the length of the piece and the writer. And don't expect you to agree with them because they're the writer with authority. So in all those cases, there's room for being wrong. But the wrong is either called out after the fact, like newspaper making a correction in an article, or is owned up to within the piece itself. So yeah, when I say music critics are, I said it right there. I'm talking about music critics. And here goes why I say they are always wrong in one way or another. All right. First of all, everybody has a right to voice their opinion, give their analysis, their assessment of anything. Everybody. If you're going to do that for a living and call yourself an expert or authority on whatever you're weighing in on, the hope is that you have some experience in that field, or at least have studied it so thoroughly that you really, really know it. To bring the world in, as I like to do, it seems to be a trend that people denigrate experience and education. Anti-intellectualist, whatever you want to say, anti-establishment. So people who have the experience and knowledge to do a job don't often get that job, are often looked down on, and the people who end up getting those jobs have much less experience, if any, often no experience in that field and little to no knowledge of it, which is where we are now and have been getting there for many, many years. Let's hope our education system improves enough for people to understand why fighting back is super important and why having people in positions of power with knowledge and experience is way fucking better than rubes who don't know, who claim to know what they're talking about and never do. Okay. So it's unlikely that most critics have a good enough level of experience with music and knowledge of music. Yet they almost act like they do. They write like they are the voice of authority. In fact, they more often than not insist they do have that much knowledge and experience and rarely own up to their shortcomings. And perhaps to overcompensate for their shortcomings, they work extra hard to prove they know what they're talking about. For example, they try to impress with a turn of phrase or a wise insight done in a way that makes you, think that they're great. Very often they often make connections and analogies and references to other music or within the music itself that are flat out wrong. They overreach. I think I give an example later on, which I will talk about when I get there. They often pad their writing with tangential knowledge that isn't really needed to achieve the piece's central purpose and is, again, probably there, if not to increase word count, which is a different consideration. It may be there to just show people, look how much I know, I'm putting it in a context that makes me seem very learned. And I can see why people get to this anti-intellectualist stance, because there are too many, erudite elitists who lord their education over people in a way that is very exclusive. It is not inclusive. It is not admitting to their humanity. So now, does that mean education itself is bad? Knowledge itself is bad? No. It's a tool. It's how you use it that makes the difference, and it's better to have it than not. These people also try to come off as a voice of authority without ever admitting bias or blind spots or lack of knowledge, and are actively claiming objectivity and authority and saying, I'm telling you this, and it's absolutely true because I know enough about it, and you're just going to have to, lump it, like it or lump it. Much of that voice of authority is based on how negative they can be. Maybe that's a defensiveness. Maybe it's jealousy, as if pointing out flaws somehow makes them more knowledgeable and superior, and or admits them into the music club. Well, if I can, take down this artist or trash this album, I must be fucking amazing because I just took down Radiohead's album or whatever it is. Or worse, taking down an album of some poor, rarely, barely known artist. They will come out saying something super negative and critical, immediately picking a side, probably sensationalism to get attention. But then there are all these caveats through the rest of the writing and exceptions that end up disproving their thesis. So they might say, this album sucks, and then go on to say, the production was really good, and this song was good, and I see where this was. Why did you say that in the first place? You want examples of this kind of writing? Go to Pitchfork. But I'm sure there are other worse publications, especially now that Pitchfork is in such a crisis, but whatever. Now, these are general statements. Not all critics are created equal either. Again, the spectrum. Some are fully reprehensible, and I wish they'd stop writing. Some do their best to fully explain their judgments in respectful ways and own up to the fact that they're judgments and try not to lord their intelligence over you. And there are all the writers in between. But yes, they are all wrong. And 3 things about that. I hope it's 3. Sometimes I say a number and then I do more, but I think it is 3 this time. First, the reason they're all wrong is because they position themselves as the authorities with the final word, leaving little to no room for discussion. So even when they're right, they're wrong because the stance and approach are combative. Not a fan of that. I think if you're going to, again, it's like I said in last week's episode, if you hold a belief, you should be confident enough in that belief that you don't need to be combative about it. You should be able to take criticism and disagreement and be like, yeah, but here's my thought on it. This is why I think this. And that's a discussion. Never heard of those. And to repeat, they very often don't know enough about music, that the theory. So I listened to this podcast and I am going to name a name, and that's Hit Parade. Seems like a great guy, seems to really love music, and knows a lot about the charts, which is what the podcast is about. So he was explaining some interpolation thing, which is a new word that I learned that everybody seems to know about taking a part of a song not as a sample, but as the structure of it and recreating it in a new way, right? Which I talked about in my covers episode and just didn't use the word interpolation. It's talking about some chord interpolation that was part of a lawsuit and then played a portion of the song that was not those chords, that did not correspond to the other song that they were talking about. And there should have been someone there, if not him, then somebody on the team vetting that, right? But this happens a lot in music criticism. They also don't know much of anything about the creation, but there are a lot of assumptions made about artistic creation that are flat out wrong. One of them, which I talked about a long time ago, is that you need to be tortured to make good art. That's bullshit. But there are so many others that are disproven quite often by the artists themselves when they're asked, how do you make a song, etc., etc. Listen to them, because they're the creators. They often don't know the motivations and intentions behind these creations or don't care. And I believe context matters. I mean, ultimately, the art matters more than anything, because 50 years from now, who cares about the context? If the song is good or album is good, it's good. Some that have been unfairly judged have, in hindsight, been seen as, classics. It's because the ultimate creative part of it, the actual art of it, was the good part. But it's good if you're going to write about something contemporaneously to know motivations and intentions, because that does make a difference in how it was created. They often don't know the micro and macro context, where it's positioned in the artist's career, or in the genre itself, or in the flow of music development throughout the history and the current state of things. That was only point one. The second reason why they're all wrong is they're coming from a system that promotes division and judgment. It's why I hate shows that make talent into a contest, the way Shark Tank makes people's livelihoods into a fucking contest. It becomes, you either win or you lose. Someone else wins. That means you lose. It becomes us, them. It becomes either or. And it's more about the commodity of music than the music itself. Yes, I'm choking on my own phlegm, but please enjoy that different voice as I speak. Third reason why they're all wrong is that it's easier to be nasty than nice. It's easier to be combative than compassionate. They often take pleasure in taking someone down. So many people do this online in all walks of life, whether it's art or politics or other things. And you can call it trolling, call it canceling, call it schadenfreude. It gives an immediate rush. You feel above that person or thing. You feel more powerful. You feel more clever. It is so much harder to build up someone. It is so much harder to be compassionate, even if you disagree. So much harder. If you're an average person, that rush of schadenfreude, whatever you want to call it, it dissipates, and you're left with a sour taste. Pyrrhic victory. If you are a super negative person with issues, you want more of it, and you make it your default way of communicating. You may even make it your voice and your livelihood and your writing. In either case, it's highly likely you don't know what you're talking about, and you don't have enough desire to truly understand people and or the things they do and the art they create from the inside. All right. And I said this last week, and I'll say it again. It's why my description of music is not a genre. I make a very crucial point that this is music talk from a music insider. I always come at it with respect for both the artist and the art, and do my best to be both informed and to understand the context of the creation and tell you when I don't know, or you look it up, or I'm just giving my opinion. I'm honest about all of that. And I try to come at it from the inside and with compassion, which fuck people who say compassion is a bad thing. To be fair to writers, I gotta be fair. Writers are also creators. It's hard to make a living as a creator, as an artist of any kind. And you often have to be sensational to get any attention. The way you do that does make a difference. Me calling this why all music critics are wrong doesn't mean that the substance of what I'm doing is me just trashing music critics throughout this episode. If you're somebody who doubles and triples and quadruples down on that attitude throughout everything you do, that's a problem. It's also true that a lot of music writing is changed by editors who have a different agenda. So they're compelled by industry politics and or money to give something a certain kind of review and a certain rating, and then have to reshape the piece to fit that. So not all the blame can be put on the critics. That is true. Critics are up against a lot of pressure too. Writers up against a lot of pressure. But you can tell by the voice of the critic where they come from, no matter how the piece was altered. You're not going to turn someone who is ultimately compassionate and trying to understand things into a total asshole just by editing it. You're just not going to do that. If you change certain things or cut out certain things, but that original voice has that vitriol and snark, it's going to come through either way. Sadly, often people who write like this come from a mountain of dislike and skepticism. Skeptics are like the people who say both sides of political issue are just as, or political parties are bad or whatever. They're distancing themselves from action and their own power and the ability to make a choice and thinking that they're above all of it. Skeptics are like that. Why be a critic of a medium you don't even like? I have read reviews of books, of movies, of music, of other things written clearly by somebody who either doesn't like that particular thing or doesn't like the subject. And then don't do it. You need somebody who at least respects it to get a good take on it. When I find a critic whose voice comes from love and respect, I'm more likely to give weight to their negative observations, whether or not I agree. So I'm talking about critics who I don't like that type of writing. But if I'm reading them and they're I have friends who write and people I love and respect who I'm like, okay, I may or may not agree with what they're saying, but they're coming at it from such a good place that I'm going to at least give consideration to what they're saying. Conversely, when a hyper-negative critic throws in something positive, it often sounds like faint praise or a backhanded compliment from a holier-than-thou wannabe. Somebody who's like, well, but I hated this entire thing, but this song was really good. And actually, there's a comment I'm going to make in the featured song that kind of comes up to that, which will be fun to go through. The damage they do, there's a big note, to a struggling artist's career is far more impactful than the good they could do because it happens far more often. Artists can recover from no review and get maybe a slight bump from a good review, but often don't recover from a bad one or have a very hard time recovering. Side but related question, since there was nowhere else to put this in the episode, do you love or hate rating systems, whether it's numbers or stars or fists or whatever icon they use? I kind of hate it the way I do genres. It is a shorthand for getting an idea of a thing's quality, but it's often either immediately wrong. So somebody says, this is 2.5 stars, and you listen and you're like, oh, there's way more quality in there than that. Or it's superlatively wrong in hindsight, such as how often Rolling Stone or other publications gave what is now considered a classic album a very tepid review or a negative review. All right. And that's because that critic didn't know enough to understand the music or the context. And they were biased and wouldn't admit to their bias. And these reviews can make or break an artist's success, the trajectory of their career. Final positive word, though. The most good a music critic can do is to call attention to something that isn't getting it. An unsung artist, or a local scene, or a subgenre, and only review it if they think it's good. If I were a reviewer, unless I was forced by the other, you have to review this, blah, blah, whatever, I would still try to find something good in it and do it in a way like that. But it would be harder. If I were a reviewer who had autonomy, I would not review things I didn't like. You're not serving anybody by doing that or didn't understand. And I think most of these pieces are that. Odds are greater that good writing that calls attention to something that isn't getting it is going to happen the more writing there is. So I think regardless of what the writing pool is out there, it's better there's more out there than less. There are professionals, hobbyists, whatever, love it. Even if most of it is somehow, wrong, there's going to be enough right in there for it to make it worth it. And honestly, some of it is still very worth absorbing. And in the bonus MxTRA on patreon.com/music is not a genre, I tell you what is worth absorbing and why and how to get the most out of it. Which brings me to the featured song. So speaking of unsung artists, Rec! Here's the featured song. It's actually from an album I made under the artist name Nick, which was my artist name before Rec. Both are really terrible for searches online, which I've mentioned before. But you'll see how it's relevant that it's under that name. The album is one I have name checked before. This is a track from it I haven't done yet. It's called the METROGRANDE Sessions because it was recorded in a studio in Brooklyn near Metropolitan and Grand, those two streets. I've talked about, and that was the name of the recording studio as well, METROGRANDE. I've talked about the production of it before, but ask me if you want to hear it again. There are a lot of personal and professional stories around it. This song I'm choosing is a redo of an older song of mine from an EP called Your EP, and it's called Your Sister. And it was one that the producer liked, so said, let's do it again. I like both versions for different reasons, even though overall I didn't love the production on this album. I still really love how some of the songs turned out, including this one. But apparently, Critic also did not love the way this album was made. I got, I always get some great reviews and positive reviews, but for this one in particular, I got a scathing review from some dude online. Couldn't stand the album, most of the album, except for It's Almost Over. And I think one other song maybe Come a Little Closer, but really, really didn't like the rest of the album and made a point of trashing it, which again, then just don't review it, But really took me to task because of my artist name, Nick. Is he trying to be like Prince or Madonna, that he's so great he only needs one name? Okay, so the truth there is yes and no. Yes, the one named artist was appealing to me, and Prince in particular, since that was also his first name, as Nick is mine. But no, because my impetus for that was I kind of wanted it to be just a casual, hey, I'm Nick, and I'm making music. Just call me Nick. You don't need to know my last name, whatever. I'm just making music. Either way, I ended up changing it. So I am picking this song, Your Sister, because it's from the album of mine that got the worst review. Even though I would say it's not the least strong album in my career, but and certainly didn't deserve this review. But this music critic thought it did. Yay for that dude. I wish I remembered his name or could find that original review. The song itself, Your Sister, is about a guy's obsession with his partner's sister. Former bandmate of mine said the song was evil. Sure. And that video is actually online from an old concert of mine if you go to Rec's YouTube channel. It's both dark and super, super funky. And I love the chord changes in it. And you'll hear it shortly. And please stream it. Please go to nickdimatteo.com/discography and you can find the album, the METROGRANDE Sessions, and it has all the links there to the various bigger streaming services. And so that comes up to the end of this, which is questions for you. Do you read music writing of any sort? If so, have you learned something from it? Do you discover music from it? Do you tend to trust critics in general? Are there certain types of critics or writing in particular that you gravitate more towards? Do you like the long form criticism or short form? Have you ever read any pieces that are more like music journalism or music critique or analysis? Do you tend to more read reviews than criticisms? I'd love to know. And what do you feel about all this? I'd love to know the answers to all this and more because my objectives, as always, are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for this companion piece to last week's episode. No idea what's coming up, but whatever that may be, it will be me talking to you next week. 2, 3.
I took your sister to a Sundance. I took your sister to a show. On the way I caught a hazy violet glow. words aren't making a sound.